should be.
Let me know right before you hit it. I need a pen. We up? Hi guys. Wednesday night. Welcome back. It's good to be here. Brendan's here with me tonight. Say hi, Brendan.
What's up?
Yeah.
How's it going?
All right. We're gonna be talking about freedom for a couple weeks, man. 4th of July is coming up. It's one of my favorite times of the year. I get to blow stuff up.
You were talking about freedom, so I put on my
Nice.
freedom shirt.
Nice. Patriotic.
Oh yeah.
Nice. Okay.
Always.
I'm not patriotic tonight. Okay, a couple announcements real quick. So speaking of 4th of July, July 5th, we are having a church picnic. So that's on a Sunday. What that looks like is sometime after church in the morning, we all kind of make our own schedule on getting out to Kirk and Amy Ott's house. There'll be food, there'll be games. I think we were trying to talk John into a fish fry, and I thought that if I announced it last week on the live broadcast that we were having a fish fry, that would work. Apparently that didn't work. So if you want to have a fish fry, everybody who has John's number, text him and say, fish please. So about 3 or 4 o'clock, what time did you say we're eating? 5? 5 o'clock?
I do not know.
I'm going to say 5 o'clock for eating, but I could be wrong. And then when the sun goes down, we'll blow up Kirk and Amy's yard with a bunch of fireworks. Sound cool? August 1st is our rummage sale. Students, parents of students, kids who work that will get money put into their personal student accounts that can be used for trips like Youth Alive. Hey, the church phone's ringing. Huh. Anyway, will you shut that door?
Yeah.
So it can be used, their personal student accounts can be used for trips like Youth Alive and things like that. And Revolution, which is September 5th, 6th, and 7th. I don't have a cost on it yet. I'm going to meet with Phil sometime before this week is over, either in person or by phone, and kind of discuss trying to lower the rate. Whatever the cost, it's a good deal for what you guys are getting. You're getting 2 nights, lodging, all your meals are going to be paid for, and probably a gift and content. So basically, in the years past, it's I'm trying to get the cost down. I don't know if I can do it or not, but we're gonna work on it. Me and Phil. He's more of a budget guy. I'm a budget by I'm a little loose budget guy.
Just spend it.
To me, a budget is just a suggestion, and if you don't follow that budget, students, that's not sound financial advice. Okay, so don't take that and say to your parents, well, Josh said that you don't really have to have a budget. It's just kind of a loose example. No, don't do that. Anyway, talking about freedom. So,
Quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
What is Gage supposed to eat?
I just saw that. Goodness. I told him his dinner was in the fridge. His dinner's in the fridge, Dylan.
Dinner's in the fridge, Dylan.
That's hilarious.
Top
Dylan, I love you. What was I saying? Oh, do you remember, Maddie, this is for you too. Okay, listen. Do you guys remember, like, your first trip in a car behind the wheel by yourself? Your maiden voyage where you're like, I got my license, I'm about to drive this car, nobody's with me, freedom.
I don't remember that.
You don't?
I remember going to work.
I remember my first time driving.
Yeah?
With a license, without an adult in the car. And
That counts.
And
Did
the
you-
Dodge Spirit.
In the Dodge Spirit.
Everybody
Okay.
just piled in the Dodge Spirit. We went to Walmart.
Is that the one that had the red hood?
Yeah.
And it was
a
like-
blue bumper.
Oh, that car was hot.
And a different shade of blue fender.
That car was
Yeah.
hot. All right.
It was nice. It was a quick car.
My first trip out in a vehicle by myself, it gave me this sense of freedom. Like, I got this car, these keys, nobody. I still live with my grandma, so I still had to abide by rules, right? But kind of. But I was like gone. Day 2 of having my car and my license and my freedom, some dude driving 90 in front of McDonald's hits me in the bumper. Almost totaled his truck. And he had like 7 kids packed in his truck.
Gosh.
Totaled his truck, put a dent in my car because I had a Beast. So the question here is, what was your first car? For me, it was a 1982 Jeep Eagle 4-wheel drive car. Beat that.
The first
$600. Bam.
the first thing titled in my name was a red F-250, 1990 F-250.
Okay.
But for a long time, I drove that green Dodge Spirit.
That Spirit was that car was it.
Yeah.
Car was hot.
For how old that car was, it drove so smooth.
Really?
I enjoyed driving that car.
I had a lot of cars over
I
the
didn't care
years,
what
but
it
that
was.
82, I mean, that gave me that sense of freedom, right? I mean, I had a lot of cars over the years. I had a lot of
Yeah.
cars that I didn't treat the best. A Shadow, a couple of Cavaliers, a Thunderbird. I had some cars that I really dug over the years. But man, that Eagle. Maddie, what was your first car?
It was a gold Ford Taurus. 96 Ford Taurus.
A gold 96 old body style
Yeah.
Ford
old.
Taurus.
Yep.
Hot.
Yeah.
Looked like a potato.
Ooh, yeah,
Hot.
it did look like a potato.
Hot. All right, what do you got in the comments? Any
Dylan said 99 Sidestep Sport Edition Ford Ranger with a custom toolbox on the back.
That
I can't
he
tell you how
killed.
many times he's said that over the years. That exact
that
he
Ford
killed.
Ranger had been passed down.
It would
from-
still
from
be
Shane.
driving if it wasn't for
That
him.
Ford Ranger, you couldn't kill it for years. For years, we were like, Dylan, that truck's not gonna last you forever. Treat it better. You should take care of your truck. It's gonna die one day. What are you gonna do when you drive home on no oil? It's gonna die. And you couldn't kill it until you roll it.
And still, it wasn't dead. It still ran.
Yeah, it still
So-
ran. I mean, goodness, that truck. What else? What else you got here?
Matt said 1982 Ford Escort two-tone blue with a bullet hole.
So my brother would name his cars, and he named that one Bullet. It literally had a bullet hole and then in the door. It was awesome. I'm like, yeah, that car was nice. This was after we would push my grandma's Crown Vic out of the garage in the middle of the night. We were borrowing it without permission. What else you got?
Reagan said Dodge Omni, can't remember the year.
Dodge Omni.
I think that was Mom's first car was a Dodge Omni.
Dodge Omni.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are hot.
Those are cool cars.
Yeah, those are
Dylan
sweet.
said I would have, and I was proving you guys wrong to the very end.
Yeah, well, you did kill it. So, who won? Mom and Dad was right.
And Matt just said shh.
Okay, we're gonna get into freedom tonight. I got a lot of stuff I want to talk to you about, me and Brendan, for the next 2 weeks. Okay, so make sure you catch everything tonight. Come back next week. We're gonna finish up freedom with 4th of July coming. Man, I really do dig this holiday. Not because I get to blow stuff up. That's fun, yeah, but it's Independence Day, and we're celebrating our freedom. I think we need to really kind of define what that means, though. Like, and Facebook, you can answer while you're out there right now too. What does freedom mean? What does the word mean? First of all, we all are aware that freedom isn't free. There's a lot of men and women who have put their lives on the line, and some of them have cost them their lives to fight to keep our freedom. And I have a high regard for those people that have served to do that. It comes at a cost. But even today, internally in our own country, can we all agree that the state of our country is a little broken right now? In a lot of different ways, in a lot of different areas, in a lot of different angles. And what's that mean? What's freedom mean to you? What's freedom look like? So I looked up the definition of freedom, just like dictionary, like what does that say? And the definition of freedom from there is the power or right to act, speak, or think as one wants without hindrance or restraint. I can agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
However, with actions comes consequences. You have the right to say whatever you want. You have the right to believe whatever you want. But sometimes those actions have consequences. You're going to touch on that in a little bit.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, that's what to me, being able to go where I please, being able to come to church and worship God as I see fit. There are some countries where that's still against the law. What? There's some countries where they could come in and kill you over it. Talk about civil liberties. That's crazy to me. Hard for me to wrap my head around. Okay? I'm thankful that we have that freedom in this country to be able to do that. I'm grateful that if I don't agree with someone who has been elected into some kind of political office, that I can speak out about how I disagree with them freely. In some countries, that's considered treason. But here, we can say, hey, I don't think he should have tweeted that. Or we could say, I'm not sure adding, 9 trillion to the deficit's a good idea. But we can say whatever we want without repercussion. Of course, you might get into a Facebook fight about it, but that's a different story.
Yeah.
That's a different lesson for a different time. Let's talk biblically for a second. So, from Genesis to Revelation, the quest for freedom is a theme found throughout the entire Bible. So, 3 chapters in, basically what happens is, 3 chapters into the story of God's creation, humanity gave up its freedom by choosing to rebel against God. There's story after story after story about people in the Old Testament losing their physical freedoms, people in the New Testament getting locked up in prison for nothing. There's countless stories about people searching for freedom. And normally that loss of freedom comes at the result of spiritual disobedience. Today, currently in our climate today, especially in churches around the country, in the Christian climate, people are basically becoming slaves to things, and they don't even realize it. Like, there are things that people chase that, man, before you even realize it, you're like, oh man, I'll put fill in the blank above everything God related. My relationship with God, I put all of this above that, and it's literally, without even realizing it, made me a slave to that. Some of the things that looks like is like money, success, romantic relationships. You can become a slave to those things if you let them control your life. Nothing wrong with money. Please don't misunderstand me. Nothing wrong with success. Okay? But when you place those things above the importance of God, you're a slave to it.
Because I think we've all been there.
Yeah.
But the hard thing about it is you don't even know that you've placed it above God
Yeah.
until you look back and you're like, well, I got what I wanted, but
Yeah.
something isn't right. And until you reflect on that and realize, oh yeah, God's not here, then
Yeah.
you're like, I really messed up. And that's why it's, you always got to keep that in check.
Right.
Your relationship with God in check. So it's super easy to do that.
So, we're going to talk a lot more about this next week, but God's answer to that spiritual bondage that we've kind of put ourselves in, we don't even realize it, is Jesus. God's answer to the Israelites who were in bondage. Jesus came to fulfill that. Okay, we're gonna talk a lot more about that next week. Brennan, what do you got for the? You got some biblical perspectives.
I've got a few verses, and the theme of these verses basically, they all kind of speak the same message, which is don't abuse your freedom. And there's a lot of we were talking about the first time out driving. As new drivers, you abuse your freedom so often, and
Dylan, I'm sorry.
I wasn't going to mention names.
I thought,
but
I
mean, I can think of when I got that curfew, when I got I had these restrictions by my parents.
Were you ever late?
Never.
Okay.
No, I was late all the time, and so that's what I'm talking about, abusing those freedoms. We've heard you're given an inch and you take a mile. We're very familiar with that. We're very familiar with doing that. So in a spiritual sense, we do that a lot as well. There's times that, God gives us these freedoms, but what we have to understand, God wanted it to be that way. You look at what Josh was just talking about in chapter 3 of Genesis. He gave Adam and Eve freedom. Give them absolute freedom to do whatever they wanted, to make whatever decision they wanted. But there was rules, and there was consequences if they broke those rules. Well, they abused their freedom. And we suffer the consequences today. So, first verse I want to talk about, 1 Corinthians 6:12. And I'll read that to you real quick. 1 Corinthians 6:12 says, "All things are lawful unto me, but all things are not expedient." So this is Paul writing the letter to the church of Corinth. And he also says, "All things are lawful for me, but I will not be brought under the power of any." So basically what this verse is saying is, you have the freedom, as a Christian, you have the freedom to do a lot of things. You have the freedom to, a lot of times as a Christian, you look at the laws of, your country, or wherever you live, whatever it may be. You look at these laws that are set in front of you, and you think, well, it's not against the law, so it must be okay. But what Paul is saying here is, just because it's okay, just because I'm allowed to do it, does not mean it's okay. Adam and Eve, just because God gave them the freedom to do whatever they wanted, didn't mean that they should do what God told them not to do. And a lot of times we fall into that trap as Christians, and we start to look exactly like the world, which we're told not to look like the world. We're told to be different from the world. And we do those things that aren't necessarily wrong. The world probably don't even care that we're doing it. They probably don't look at us any differently. But it's not expedient. It doesn't do anything for the cause of Christ. In fact, sometimes it ends up hurting the cause of Christ.
That's right.
And
there's definite consequences to your actions.
Exactly. So don't get that mindset that, well, it's okay, so I'm going to do it. Look at it like Paul was looking at it here. It's not expedient, so I'm not going to do it. Next verse is Galatians 5:13 and 14. It says, "For brethren, ye have been called unto liberty, only use not liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another. For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." So, again, we're blessed with that freedom. God has blessed us with that freedom. But that freedom, and this is kind of talking about freedom from that sin, which we'll talk a lot more about next week. But in that freedom, we shouldn't pick and choose when we want to use that freedom. We shouldn't pick and choose, well, when is this freedom best for me? Because we have that freedom, and we should use that freedom to love and serve one another.
That's a good point.
And a lot of times we like to reserve that freedom when we don't want to do anything. Or we like to, be a little more liberal with our freedom when it's those things that aren't necessarily expedient. So it's not something that God didn't bless you with that freedom so you can pick and choose when you were going to use it, when you were going to use it to your best advantage. He wants you to be using it at all times. My next verse is Romans 6:22. Romans 6:22 says, "But now being made free from sin and become servants to God, ye have your fruit unto holiness and the end everlasting life. So, yes, we've become free to that sin. I'm trying not to dive into that too much because, like I said, we're going to talk about that next week. But you've become free from that sin, but you still have responsibilities within that freedom. Once we take on that salvation, once we take on the freedom that the true freedom that God has given us, we have a responsibility for that. It's not just something that is a one time and done with the freedom. We have a responsibility, and a lot of times Paul, he opens his letters, the greetings to his letters. He says that Paul, a bondservant of Jesus Christ. He doesn't say it to make himself look great in any way. Usually he says Paul, a bondservant. The most humble way that you can open a letter to somebody is calling yourself a bondservant to Christ. He didn't put himself above anybody else. So what Paul is doing here is saying that he has a responsibility with that freedom. And his responsibility is to serve Christ. His responsibility is to be a bondservant to Christ. So, yes, we become free of that sin, but it doesn't mean that you're just free to go out in the world and do whatever you want. You should try your absolute best to serve God every chance you get. My last verse, 1 Peter 2:16. This kind of ties into the verse I just read. But it says, as free and not using your liberty for a cloak of maliciousness, but as the servants of God. When you receive salvation, I believe what the Bible says, and what the Bible says is that when we receive that salvation, there's nothing that can take it away. There is nothing that can possibly remove our seat in heaven, if you will. There's nothing that can remove that from us. We're in. We have received eternal life, and that was only through Jesus Christ. But sometimes that goes to our heads, doesn't it? I mean, sometimes we get that mindset of, well, no matter what I do, I've got a ticket into heaven. No matter what I do, I'm good to go. So a lot of times that's when we start to really abuse that freedom, because we know no matter what, God's going to love us anyway. God's going to show His mercy on us anyway. And a lot of times we use that as a ticket to sin. A lot of times, that verse is telling us that your salvation, your freedom of that sin, does not give you a license to sin more. That freedom is so you can be free from that sin, so you can try your hardest to sin less and try your hardest to serve God any chance you get. So that's the biggest verse that I wanted to touch on was, just because you receive that freedom from God doesn't mean you have that license to sin. And I think not only spiritually, but in a lot of aspects of life, we abuse our freedom in that way. And in all those ways that I mentioned, we abuse our freedom.
It's like the phrase, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
People believe if you say, I'm just saying, you get to say whatever you want.
Right.
That's not what it means. You don't get to say whatever you want just because you said, I'm just saying. Don't abuse your freedom just because you have it. There are consequences.
And the last thing I want to, it's not true when it comes to your salvation. No matter how much you abuse it, you don't lose it. But there is a lot of freedoms that we enjoy in this country, a lot of freedoms that we enjoy as Christians, that if we do abuse it, you will lose it. Luckily, salvation isn't one of those things, because I got to tell you, I'd be having to pray for salvation every day if that was the case.
Good.
But if you do abuse some of your freedoms, you will realize that you no longer have those freedoms to abuse anymore. So
good.
That's what I've got for.
Can we get into some history a little bit?
Yeah.
I like history. I think I've always liked history. Let's talk about. I'm not going to go as far back as I normally would to kind of establish where I want to head, but let's talk about how our country started. Okay. Normally I would go all the way back to the Pilgrims, but I'm not going to do that. No. Okay. All right. So let's talk about how our country started. I believe that our system that is based out of the Constitution is probably Well, it's one of the greatest systems ever created. Is it perfect? Is it flawless? The way it's been twisted and abused? No. Okay. But the document itself, okay, so look, the lifespan of most free, great nations is about 200 years. What are we going on? 244? 244 years? I mean, that's remarkable. In that time span, France has had 7 different forms of government. In the time frame that we've had 1. Italy is on its 51st form of government in that time frame. So the fact that ours has stood the test of time, I mean, you just can't argue that.
Right.
It's 244 years old and still, you can't argue that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's remarkable, right? I believe that that document that the founding fathers gave us is timeless. And there's some misconceptions sometimes about the founding fathers and what they meant, and this country was founded on a Christian belief system, and people are like, no, it wasn't. The founding fathers were slave owners and they were crazy and this and that. Okay, look. We can know what they meant because they wrote it down. It's kind of cool. I know, right? It's crazy. So listen, this is the strict constructionist interpretation, and all that basically says is, I believe they meant what they said when they said it. And I'm going to give you a few examples from the founding fathers, but I urge you to do some research on this. Were the founding fathers perfect? No. Did they all have problems? Yes, they did. Just like all Christians today have issues, okay? But we can know what they meant because they wrote it down. Listen, here's a few quotes from them. John Jay, who was our original Chief Justice, says this: Providence has given our people the choice of their rulers. Providence, a higher power. It is the duty as well as the privilege and interest of our Christian nation to select and prefer Christians for their rulers. Well, that probably hasn't happened in quite some time, but that was what they intended.
Did you say Christian nation?
Yeah.
Weird.
Yeah. In our Christian nation. That's what he said. In our Christian nation. George Washington, who was probably one of the greatest Americans, I mean, in my opinion, that ever lived. George Washington, in his farewell address, this is what he says: Of all the dispositions and habits that lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. Indispensable supports. That was in most textbooks till about 1965. You haven't seen it in one since, which should scare you. The University of Houston assembled writings from the founding fathers. They assembled 15,000 writings from the founding fathers. They quoted John Locke. They quoted Sir William Blackstone. They quoted great thinkers. They quoted philosophers. And they quoted brilliant writers of their day in all of these writings that were assembled. 34%, a third of their quotes came directly from the Bible. I think I know what they meant when they said what they said. Thomas Jefferson. Oh, that's the one that gets everybody going. He is an atheist. Okay, look. Thomas Jefferson was not known as the most Christian of the founding fathers, clearly. Okay? But while president, what he did do was he chaired the school board for D.C., and while he was on that chair, he decided that the Bible and the Watts hymnal should be textbooks in school. So the people that cry Thomas Jefferson's an atheist, he was a bad guy. even he decided, hey, the Bible's a textbook. The Watts hymnal is a textbook. I bet if you dug hard enough, you'd probably find a Watts hymnal running around this church somewhere.
You think so?
Yeah. Textbook. Patrick Henry. I love stories of Patrick Henry. He was a fiery young dude, and this is what he said. It cannot be emphasized too strongly or too often that this great nation was founded not by religionists, but by Christians. Not on religion, but on the gospel of Jesus Christ. Founding father. James Madison said, okay, fourth president of the United States. James Madison said, we have staked the whole future of American civilization not on the power of the government, far from it. We have staked the future of all our political institutions upon the capacity of each and all of us to govern ourselves according to the 10 commandments of God. President. Far too often we hear people say, well, you can't possibly know what the Founding Fathers meant. No, we can. We can. We can know what they said. We can know what they meant. We can know what they wanted. We can know what they thought. We can know what they believed because they wrote it down. In all the founding documents of this nation that composed the Constitution, 34% of them quoted the Bible directly. Please don't tell me that you can't understand what the Founding Fathers intended. The other view of our Constitution tweaks it, twists it, grossly misrepresents it, complicates it. It's kind of deflating sometimes to sit back and watch those things happen. And I can't believe they used that part of the Constitution to twist their narrative for that. Okay? So the question then becomes, where does that leave us today? Now, no system is perfect. Please understand that. But I believe wholeheartedly that we have traveled quite some distance away from what they intended. We're pretty far away from what they intended, are we not? That doesn't mean that our country isn't still great. It is still great. I believe it's still one of the greatest nations that ever existed, honestly. And I enjoy our freedoms in that. But right now, and for quite some time, let's be honest, it's kind of broken. And I think it's broken because we've come so far away from what the Founding Fathers actually intended. And that is, we're partially to blame.
Yeah.
And we're partially to blame because we've been silent for far too long.
Yeah, and I think that's it. You know, when I think the way that our country works, when you said, you know, it works. You know, for 200 plus years, it's worked.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing about it is that we have a say. You know, like you were saying at the beginning, there's countries that, you know, if you do speak out against a leader in the government, then you can be thrown in jail for that. You know, that's something that's so important in this country, but we've taken it for granted far too often. And the reason is that, you know, those who are trying to, you know, remove God from the country, remove all these things that the Founding Fathers clearly stated that we need in this country. Right. You know, they've been loud about it, and we wonder what's going on. You know, why are these things happening? Well, it's because a group of people are being loud, and nobody is saying a thing about it.
Yeah.
And as Christians, you know, that's somewhere that we've obviously failed because it's gotten the way that it's gotten. But you know, that's the way that you get things back. You know, we've heard the saying, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. You know, it's time to be loud. If you want something to change, you gotta make some noise about it. You gotta let people know that there's a problem there.
Christians, Christian students, parents of Christian students, listen to me. We've been silent far too long. It's not that we're losing our freedoms as much as it is that we're giving them away.
Oh yeah.
And I think the solution is getting back to what our roots are. Well, what's our roots? Well, here's our roots. The founding fathers quoted the Bible 34%. I think we know our roots. So, I told you most great nations, the average lifespan of most great nations is about 200 years. We're at about 244. Okay. Basically, those nations have progressed through this kind of a way of thinking over that course of that 200 years that ultimately probably destroys it. And I want to go over those steps with you real quick, and I want you to think about, while we're doing that, about where the United States is on that list. Like, where do you think we are in this pattern? Okay, and I wrote it out for you so that when I read it really fast, you can look at it also. So, basically, most free nations start, and let me know if this picture doesn't show it very well, Maddie, but this is the sequence, okay? From bondage to spiritual faith, from spiritual faith to great courage, then to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance to selfishness, from selfishness to complacency, from complacency to apathy, from apathy to dependency, and dependence back to bondage. The question then becomes, where do you think we are as a nation on this list? Selfishness, complacency, apathy? I don't know. Where, as a nation, where do you think we land on here?
So, if you look at, it's scary to say it, but I mean,
If you don't,
I'd say
I'm
we're
getting
right.
ready
We're right at the last step. You know, we're such a dependent country,
Yeah.
and here's what I mean by that.
Yeah.
You have to have a law that says wear your seatbelt.
Yeah.
If our government has to hold our hand to tell us how to do everything, we're dependent on that.
Yeah.
We're dependent on, instead of just putting that seatbelt on ourselves, people have to have a law saying you better wear your seatbelt, or this is what's going to happen. You're going to be injured. You're going to be killed. And I think with so many other things, that's a small one.
Yeah.
Very small one. But we're so dependent on our country. We'd rather make them make a law rather than just do it.
Yeah.
And
So, with most general elections, outside of this last one, the last presidential election, which I think the voter turnout for that general election from all registered voters was about 67%. Okay? Outside of that election, most general elections have a voter turnout of registered voters of about 50%. That means 50% of the country is depending on someone else to make the decisions for them. Come on.
I think if you look at this town alone, you know, so many times you hear great things about St. Clair, right? Hardly ever. When's the last time you heard someone say, I got to run to St. Clair for something? Everybody's got to run to Sullivan or Washington or Union. Everybody's got to go somewhere else for something. And the problem with that is that we've got a town that wants to be better, and we've got a town that isn't growing, that isn't, and the problem with that is we're not doing anything about it.
Yeah.
And I'm guilty. I'm guilty as the next person. But I mean, I wonder what our town hall meetings look like. I wonder what those kind of meetings look like. And some of you, I know a lot of you aren't old enough to vote, but you know, you got parents that can vote. You got, you know, relatives that can vote. And that's our job. And I think we've forgotten that. Like you said, we've depended on other people just to make those decisions for us.
When I go vote, I go, my polling place is City Hall, because it's like my backyard, right? And so I go up to City Hall, I walk in, I do my registering, I get about, I go vote, right? I'm normally in and out of there in about, depending on the ballot, right? 15 minutes.
Yeah.
15 minutes. I know it would be a pain, but wouldn't it be nice to say, man, I had to wait an hour
Yeah.
to vote? Because you know what that means? It means we're not dependent
Right.
on other people to make decisions for us. I think the social government assistant programs are out of control. We've become so dependent on the government to step in and do things for us, to step in and pay us, to step in and fill in the blank, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've become so dependent on the government to do those things for us that I hate to say it, but I believe we're in dependency mode. But there's a solution. I don't want to be all doom and gloom. There's a solution. Okay? I believe each and every one of us was born for a purpose. I believe that each and every one of us has the ability to make a difference. I believe God gave each and every one of us a voice to be used to stand up for our freedoms. How much time are we at on this? Do I have time to go into one more story?
7:40.
Oh yeah. Okay, I wasn't gonna do this now. I was gonna save for next week, but I don't care. I'm gonna do it. I want you to hear this speech. It's probably one of the greatest political speeches in American history from 1775. Okay, so basically the delegates are all they're arguing amongst one another. They're going back and forth on what course of action needed to be taken on what's happening here in the country, and are we going to go to war? Are we not going to go to war? What are we going to do? And some of the delegates wanted to bow down and just do whatever the king said, and the other ones are like, no, we're here for freedom,
Yeah.
and we deserve a better freedom than what we're getting. And so in this room of delegates and political powers, this kid stands up. I say kid, but he was just a young, what we would call today a college age kid. He was probably 20 or something. He stands up, and this is the speech that he gave, Patrick Henry. Okay, so this is what he said. He said, "For my own part, I consider it as nothing less than a question of freedom or slavery." Talking about the state of their nation at that moment. "It is only in this way that we can hope to arrive at truth and fulfill the great responsibility which we hold to God and our country. If we wish to be free, if we mean to preserve these inestimable privileges for which we have been so long contending, if we mean not basely to abandon the noble struggle in which we have so long engaged, we must fight." Now imagine a passionate young man getting up and speaking to these political powers this speech. "An appeal to arms and to the God of hosts is all that is left us. When shall we be stronger?" This is kind of edited, okay? I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's kind of edited. "When shall we be stronger? Will it be next week or the next year? Shall we gather strength by irresolution or inaction? Shall we acquire the means of effectual resistance by lying supinely on our backs and hugging the delusive phantom of hope until our enemies shall have bound us hand and foot? Besides, we shall not fight our battle alone. There is a just God who presides over the destinies of nations and who will raise up friends to fight our battle for us. The battle is not to the strong alone, it is to the vigilant, the active, the brave. Gentlemen may cry, 'Peace, peace,' but there is no peace. The war has actually begun. The next gale that sweeps from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms." So what he's saying here is, whether you want it to or not, the fight's already started. Regardless of what you think, you guys are crying for peace. It's too late for peace, is what he's saying here. He says, our brethren are already in the field. And then he says, one of the most profound statements that can apply to each and every one of us. He says, why stand we here idle? If life so dear, or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery, forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. We've reached this point in our nation where, as Christians, we're guilty of standing idle. That's what I believe. And I think the time has come for us to actually stand up for what we believe in. It's time to let our voices be heard. It's time to preserve the freedoms that we've been gifted and that we're losing. Still one of the greatest nations in the world, I believe. But if we stand idle, we will lose it. That's what I believe. Anything to add?
I think that, like I was saying, I think he's saying the same thing. If we're not saying anything, then we're standing here idle. And I don't think we can stress how serious this is, because you saw on that list, there's one more step. And if we cross that line, you got to start all over again. But the good thing about that is where we're at now, we don't have to finish out the list. We can work our way back up the list. And as long as we're quiet, as long as we're not trying to make any difference, as long as we're not trying to make things better, things will get worse. Things will progress down the list. So, we don't have much more to go. There's not a lot more time left. And I know you think that, I think we're all guilty of that mindset of dependency. You think that somebody else will do it. But I think it's time to, step up like Patrick Henry did and just say something, do something. So,
as the 4th of July approaches, what is that, next week? 2 weeks? As the 4th of July approaches and we get, we get the barbecues and the fireworks and the extended weekend and the float trips and
what's next week?
fill in the blank, whatever you like to do that weekend. Baseball games. Baseball's coming, by the way. Whatever you like to do, man, just do me a favor. I challenge you, okay? Take a moment, go in and read some of these things that come directly from our founding fathers on the basis of our country. Look around at some of the things that are happening and stand up for what you believe in. Why stand we here idle? We pray.
Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for all you've given us. Thank you for this wonderful country that we live in. I pray that you just help us not take these freedoms for granted, Lord. I pray that you just, overall, Lord, I pray that you just help us to put you front and center in this country, Lord. Lord, I pray that you just help us to move when you tell us to move. I pray that you just help us I pray that you guide us in the way that you want us to move, Lord. Lord, I pray that you just forgive me where I fail you. In your name I pray. Amen.
Amen.